Have you ever stood in a glittering ballroom, hearing champagne glasses clink, realizing the boss you bled for is destroying you before 500 VIP guests? That was my reality last Friday. He thought firing me on stage would leave me a pathetic loser, but he forgot one Silicon Valley rule: never set the house on fire when your enemy holds the sprinkler blueprints. Stick around. How I crushed his empire is the most expensive lesson you will ever hear. Hello to all our wonderful listeners at Boss Revenge Stories, and thank you so much for tuning in. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which means we are forced to stop uploading new videos here for the foreseeable future and shift our operations entirely to Patreon. If you find today's story engaging, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear even more incredible, fully exclusive true stories that are much longer, featuring highly detailed situations that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube, complete with multiple emotional voice actors bringing the drama to life in a single story. You can join by scanning the QR code of our Patreon page on your screen or by clicking the Patreon channel link in the description or the comments section of this video. Let us dive right into today's corporate nightmare and meet our protagonist, Riley Myers. The air in the audiovisual control booth at the Grand Atrium smelled faintly of ozone, stale sweat, and the bitter dregs of my third cup of black coffee. It was pitch dark up here, a stark contrast to the blinding chandeliers illuminating the ballroom below. My fingers flew across the sticky keyboard of my laptop, desperately compiling a last-minute patch for the presentation system. The server was threatening to crash, which meant the rural health mapping software we were supposed to be debuting for Horizon Health Access was hanging by a single thread of hastily written code. I took a sip of the lukewarm sludge in my cup and suppressed a deep, shuddering sigh. Down in the VIP green room, our fearless leader was dealing with his own crises. Preston Vance, the Chief Executive Officer of Horizon Health Access, was currently screaming at a freelance makeup artist. I could hear it all through the intercom headset clamped to my ear. He was not reviewing the keynote speech I had stayed awake for 48 hours to write for him. He was not memorizing the critical data points regarding patient outreach in underserved communities. No, Preston was throwing a tantrum because the concealer was not adequately masking the dark circles under his eyes, and he felt it made him look less like a visionary tech founder and more like a guy who had spent the last 72 hours panic trading cryptocurrency, which, to be perfectly fair, was exactly what he had been doing. Preston was the quintessential Silicon Valley tech bro masquerading as a philanthropic savior. He wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than our annual server hosting budget, threw around buzzwords like decentralized synergy and blockchain philanthropy, and possessed an ego so massive it generated its own gravitational pull. For 3 years, I had been orbiting that black hole. My official title on the company website was Chief Operating Officer. In reality, I was the designated janitor for every mess Preston left in his wake. Over the past 36 months, I had done everything from rewriting the core back-end infrastructure when his cheap outsourced developers vanished, to sitting in endless meetings, offering forced smiles and apologies to angel investors who had grown weary of his constant pivoting and slippery financial projections. I was the one who built the product. I was the one who kept the servers running. I was the one who made sure our nonprofit actually provided health access to people in need. While Preston spent his days recording podcast interviews about his morning routine and ice baths, but tonight was supposed to be the finish line. Tonight was the gala. This was not just another extravagant dinner where rich people ate tiny appetizers and pretended to care about poverty. This was a survival event. We were entirely out of runway. If we did not secure the $5 million grant from Vanguard Dynamics tonight, Horizon Health Access would not make payroll next week. The entire operation would fold. My phone vibrated violently against the console. I glanced down. It was a text from Preston, the fourth one in the last 10 minutes. Make sure my name on the title slide is at least 20% larger. The current font makes me look weak. I stared at the glowing screen. There was no gratitude for the code. There was no thank you to the engineering team for working straight through the weekend. There was only the relentless, insatiable hunger for his own glorification, completely ignoring the blood and sweat of the team keeping his paper empire afloat. I typed a quick, emotionless acknowledgement, adjusting the font size on the master presentation file just to keep him from marching up to the booth and unplugging a vital router in a fit of rage. As I dragged his name to dominate the screen, a bizarre sense of calm washed over me. The corporate burnout that had been chewing on my bones for 3 years suddenly crystallized into cold, hard clarity. I tabbed over to my email client. Sitting quietly in my draft folder was a beautifully composed, professionally sterile message addressed to the board of directors and Preston himself. It was my resignation letter. I had spent 3 weeks crafting it, ensuring it struck the perfect balance of gratitude and firm boundaries. I had decided that I was not going to scream. I was not going to demand credit. I was simply going to survive this gala, secure the $5 million Vanguard Dynamics funding so my team could keep their jobs, and then, the moment Preston walked off that stage, I would hit send. I would pack up my laptop, walk out into the crisp night air, and reclaim the shreds of my dignity. I was going to leave quietly. I just wanted it all to be over. 45 minutes before the heavy oak doors were scheduled to swing open and admit the city elite, I slipped out of the audiovisual booth to do a final physical sweep of the stage. The grand ballroom was a masterclass in manufactured opulence, a perfect theater designed to separate wealthy philanthropists from their capital. Waitstaff in crisp white uniforms were meticulously aligning heavy silver cutlery on tables draped in midnight blue silk. Giant crystal centerpieces caught the ambient lighting, refracting fractured rainbows across the room. It was a flawless, glittering facade. I navigated through the labyrinth of empty VIP tables, my sensible black flats sinking into the plush carpet, feeling like a ghost moving through a machine built entirely on carefully constructed lies. I approached the grand podium, running my hand along the polished mahogany, checking the cables, and ensuring the hidden teleprompter screens were angled perfectly for a chief executive officer who lacked the discipline to memorize his own talking points. The area just off stage was draped in heavy velvet shadows, a deliberate blind spot away from the blinding rigging lights suspended above. As I knelt to secure a redundant microphone cable to the floorboard, a voice cut through the low hum of the industrial air conditioning. It was a quiet, resonant baritone, the kind of voice that never needed to raise its volume to demand absolute, unwavering attention. Your chief executive officer promised our board end-to-end encryption protocols on the patient intake nodes. Yet, your latest open-source repository commit suggests you are still relying on a heavily patched legacy framework. I stood up slowly, my heart executing a strange, calculated flutter in my chest. Stepping out of the darkest corner of the stage wings was Marcus, the commanding force behind Vanguard Dynamics. He was not wearing a flashy bespoke tuxedo, nor was he flashing a heavy diamond watch like the rest of the venture capitalists who frequented these events. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal suit that projected the calm, predatory stillness of a man who owned the board on which everyone else was merely playing a game. There were no polite pleasantries. There were no formal corporate introductions. He launched a direct, surgical strike at the absolute weakest structural pillar of our technical infrastructure. I did not flinch. The panic response in my brain had burned out 2 years ago. I immediately switched from exhausted event administrator to lead systems architect. We are utilizing a patched legacy framework for the front-end interface solely to maintain backward compatibility with the severely outdated hardware currently used in rural clinics, I replied, my voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of hesitation. However, the data packets are stripped, tokenized, and re-encrypted through a decentralized secure tunnel before they ever touch our main servers. The vulnerability your engineering team flagged is a localized user interface bug, not a core security flaw. Patient data remains entirely quarantined and compliant with federal regulations. Marcus took a slow step forward, the ambient stage light catching the sharp, unforgiving angles of his face. He did not smile, but his eyes narrowed with an intense, assessing focus that felt like a physical weight. "An acceptable workaround," he murmured, his tone betraying a hint of genuine surprise. "Second question, the latency and the synchronization between offline field data and the main cloud database. Preston claimed the system operates in real time. My data analysts ran a stress simulation and found a lag of up to 12 hours in low-bandwidth disaster zones. In emergency triage situations, a 12-hour delay is a death sentence." He was testing me. Preston had indeed lied through his perfectly whitened teeth during the last pitch meeting, glossing over the offline synchronization limitations with vague, sweeping promises of satellite uplink magic that we simply did not possess. Preston was speaking to our optimal Phase 3 roadmap capabilities, I countered smoothly, instantly providing the polished corporate translation for my boss and his outright fabrications. The harsh reality of rural telecommunications infrastructure dictates a strict store and forward protocol. I personally wrote a localized caching algorithm that prioritizes life-threatening triage data, compressing it into micropackets that can ping across unstable, low-signal cellular networks within 3 to 5 minutes. Routine demographic data takes the 12-hour background sync. The critical path is protected at all costs. Marcus stopped just a few feet away from me. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with unspoken realizations. He was actively peeling back the glossy marketing veneer of Horizon Health Access and staring directly at the raw engine I had built. "Question 3, he said, his voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "If the localized caching algorithm is as robust and efficient as you claim, why did your entire staging environment crash during the beta stress test last month?" I held his piercing gaze. This was the darkest secret Preston had buried, the catastrophic failure he had confidently blamed on a rogue server outage during our last board meeting. "Because our chief executive officer demanded we redirect 30% of our back-end computing resources to run an unauthorized background script, mining an alternative cryptocurrency on our proprietary cloud infrastructure," I stated plainly, the unvarnished truth tasting cold and metallic on my tongue. The system did not fail because of the code architecture. It failed because it was being actively choked from the inside by its own founder. I isolated and killed the script the next morning, masking the downtime as a mandatory server migration error to prevent an immediate investor panic. For the first time, a genuine, terrifyingly sharp smile touched the corners of Marcus and his mouth. The amusement did not reach his cold eyes. It was the look of a grandmaster watching an opponent realize they were checkmated 3 moves ago. He understood instantly: the glossy brochures, the charismatic speeches, the visionary branding. It was all a hollow, rotting shell. I was the titanium spine holding the entire fragile beast upright. "A high-performance sports car cannot run if the driver does not know the difference between the gas and the brake," Marcus said softly, his tone laced with a dangerous kind of respect. "How long do you plan to be his mechanic?" "Riley." He did not wait for my answer. He reached into the inner breast pocket of his suit jacket and produced a thick, matte black business card. He extended his hand, offering the heavy cardstock to me. "My private line," he stated with absolute authority. "Vanguard Dynamics has zero interest in investing in charismatic liabilities, but we are always aggressively in the market for architects who can actually build the future they promise on stage. Call my executive office on Tuesday morning. We have a vacant director chair in our True Technology Incubator division. It requires someone who knows how to keep the servers running when the house is burning down." I took the card. It felt like a solid iron anchor dropped into the middle of a raging hurricane. I did not gasp, nor did I overwhelm him with desperate, fawning gratitude. I maintained the exact same composed, emotionless exterior that had allowed me to survive 3 grueling years in Preston and his chaotic circus. "Thank you, Marcus. I will keep that in mind," I replied, my voice perfectly even and controlled. He gave a singular, decisive nod, then turned and melted back into the heavy velvet shadows of the VIP corridor. leaving me entirely alone in the quiet, buzzing tension of the empty stage. I looked down at the black card resting in my palm. The golden embossed lettering gleamed faintly in the low stage lights. It was an exit strategy, a golden parachute forged entirely from my own hidden competence. I slipped the card into the inner pocket of my tailored blazer, right next to my phone, which currently held the finalized draft of my resignation email. My heart beat with a steady, powerful, rhythmic thrum. The soul-crushing exhaustion that had been dragging me down just an hour ago was entirely gone, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. All I had to do was maintain the loyal soldier facade for a few more hours. I just needed to let Preston have his grand moment under the spotlight, secure the $5 million funding for the sake of the engineering team. And then I would be free to walk away, stepping out of the shadows and into my own future. The grand ballroom of the grand atrium had transformed into a flawless symphony of orchestrated wealth and calculated generosity. 500 of the most influential venture capitalists, elite philanthropists, and aggressive tech magnates in the city were seated around 50 midnight blue velvet tables. Everything was running with the terrifying precision of a luxury Swiss timepiece. From my designated station just off the right wing of the main stage, enveloped in the comforting shadows, I monitored the live diagnostic feeds, the custom donation tracker application, a complex piece of architecture I had coded entirely from scratch over 3 sleepless weekends, was projected onto the massive secondary screens bracketing the stage. The numbers were climbing with intoxicating speed. $250,000, $400,000, $750,000. Every single time a VIP guest tapped their encrypted smart card on the customized centerpieces, a gentle, highly satisfying chime echoed through the sophisticated acoustic sound system, immediately followed by a tasteful burst of digital confetti cascading down the screens. The guests were absolutely eating it up, clapping politely, thoroughly intoxicated by their own perceived nobility and the frictionless technology facilitating it. We were heavily tracking to hit our preliminary target even before the main pitch had begun. It was, by all metric definitions, a total operational triumph. For the first time in 36 months, my shoulders finally dropped a fraction of an inch. The finish line was within arm's reach. Then, the ambient house lights dimmed to a dramatic, moody charcoal. A sweeping, cinematic orchestral track swelled through the hidden subwoofers, the heavy bass vibrating right through the soles of my sensible black flats. The main spotlight, a blinding column of pure white, carved a sharp path through the darkness, settling dead center on the polished mahogany podium. Preston Vance walked out. He moved with the practiced, predatory swagger of a man who genuinely believed the universe was explicitly created to serve him as an adoring audience. His bespoke midnight navy suit caught the harsh lighting perfectly, the fabric shifting like liquid glass, just as he had violently demanded earlier. As he passed my concealed position in the wings, a heavy wave of his signature scent hit me like a physical blow. It was a suffocating blend of an absurdly expensive bergamot cologne and the sharp, unmistakable, burning sting of high-end bourbon. He had been drinking, not just a polite, celebratory sip with a donor, but enough to make his eyes gleam with a reckless, untethered kind of manic energy that terrified me. He gripped the outer edges of the podium, flashing a perfectly whitened, predatory smile at the sea of 500 expectant faces. The applause was deafening, a roaring wave of validation. He let it wash over him, closing his eyes for a brief, incredibly self-indulgent second, before leaning aggressively into the microphone. He launched into the keynote. It was the exact, meticulously researched script I had agonized over for 48 straight hours, but he delivered it with a sickeningly hollow charisma. He weaponized my late-night labor, twisting my genuine, hard-fought data points about marginalized rural communities into a self-aggrandizing sermon about his own macro vision and his unparalleled capacity for disruptive empathy. He paced the width of the stage, gesturing expansively, soaking up the reverent, captive silence of the ultra-wealthy crowd. I watched the teleprompter feed scrolling smoothly on my secondary monitor, holding my breath, waiting for the final slide. The call to action that would officially secure the $5 million Vanguard Dynamics commitment. We were 2 paragraphs away, 1 paragraph away. Suddenly, Preston stopped pacing. He planted his leather-clad feet squarely in the center of the stage and looked directly up at the audiovisual booth perched in the balcony. He did not look at the teleprompter. He raised his left hand and gave a sharp, violent, slicing motion across his throat. It was the universal, undeniable emergency cut signal. Up in the booth, the junior technician must have panicked in the dark. The teleprompter screen went instantly black. The majestic, carefully rendered background image of a state-of-the-art rural clinic vanished entirely from the 60-foot main screen behind him. For 3 agonizing seconds, there was absolutely nothing but a glaring, bright blue holding slide illuminating the ballroom. I tapped my headset frantically, whispering urgent commands to the booth to revert immediately to the master presentation file, but the line was completely dead. Preston had ordered them to lock me out of the communication channel. A new slide loaded onto the colossal screen behind him. It was a file I had never seen before in my life. The header, rendered in a brutal, oversized sans serif font, read Organizational Restructuring Chart. The background was stark white, violently bright and aggressive against the dark, intimate room. It displayed the corporate hierarchy of Horizon Health Access. At the very top was Preston, his name boxed in a regal, glittering gold border. Below him, branching out, were the various departments, but right in the middle, directly beneath his golden box, was a massive, glaring visual anomaly. The box labeled Chief Operating Officer, bearing the name Riley Myers, had a thick, jagged red line drawn diagonally right through it. It was not a subtle, corporate graphic. It looked like it had been slashed violently with a digital marker, the red pixels bleeding down the pristine white screen like an open wound. Time instantly lost its normal velocity. The air in my lungs crystallized, turning to solid, unbreathable ice. The ambient noise of the ballroom, the gentle clinking of crystal glasses, the soft shifting of expensive silk fabric, all of it faded into a high-pitched, ringing vacuum inside my ears. I felt the warm blood drain entirely from my face, rushing violently down to my feet, leaving my hands cold, clammy, and entirely numb. My fingers, resting on the hard plastic edge of my control monitor, began to tremble with a microscopic, uncontrollable frequency. I stared up at the giant screen, my analytical brain desperately trying to process the visual information, attempting to frantically categorize it as a cruel prank, a catastrophic system glitch, a targeted hack, but the sheer, deliberate cruelty of that thick red line told a horrifyingly different story. Preston leaned heavily into the microphone stand. His voice, previously booming, inspirational, and full of false hope, dropped into a hushed, theatrical tone of manufactured solemnity. But from where I stood in the shadows, just 20 feet away, I could see the malicious, triumphant glint in his bloodshot eyes. He was looking right at me. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the massive hall, bouncing ominously off the vaulted architectural ceilings. "To truly move into the future, to aggressively scale our macro vision and serve humanity, we must have the absolute courage to leave behind outdated, inefficient machinery that can no longer keep up with our incredible velocity." He paused, letting the heavy silence hang in the air, actively savoring the absolute, unquestioned control he had over the room. I want to publicly express my profound, personal gratitude to Riley Myers for her past administrative contributions. However, a visionary company requires visionary leadership. He took a slow, deep, theatrical breath, squaring his shoulders. Therefore, starting from this exact second, Riley is officially terminated, clearing the path for true, unhindered innovation. The ensuing silence was not merely the absence of noise, It was a heavy physical entity that crashed down upon the 500 elite guests. It was the suffocating, paralyzing stillness of a crowd collectively witnessing a brutal public execution. No one moved a single muscle. No one dared to breathe. Then, from the third row of the ultra-exclusive VIP section, a heavy silver dessert fork slipped from a paralyzed, manicured hand and struck a bone china plate. The sharp, piercing clatter rang out like a gunshot in a morgue. As if directly triggered by the metallic sound, the primary stage lighting shifted its programming. The massive main spotlight snapped away from Preston. With a loud, motorized hum, the heavy light fixture pivoted sharply to the right and slammed its blinding, intense beam directly onto the wing of the stage, directly onto me. 500 pairs of eyes turned in absolute unison, following the harsh, unforgiving beam of white light, locking onto the exact spot where I stood. Frozen in place, completely exposed, and violently stripped of every single thing I had built. The blinding beam of the spotlight hit me with the physical force of a tidal wave, pinning me against the dark velvet curtains of the stage wing. For a fraction of a second, the universe expected a very specific reaction. The 500 elite guests staring at me expected my knees to buckle. Preston, standing center stage with that grotesque, drunken smirk plastered across his face, absolutely expected me to burst into tears, cover my face, and flee into the back corridors like a frightened animal. He wanted a theatrical display of my total destruction to cement his absolute dominance. But a funny thing happens when a person who has been pushed to the absolute brink of corporate exhaustion is suddenly pushed 1 inch further. The panic does not escalate. It completely evaporates. The freezing terror that had gripped my chest just seconds ago vanished, replaced instantly by a profound, terrifyingly cold stillness. My heart rate plummeted. My vision sharpened until I could see the individual beads of sweat forming on Preston and his forehead 50 feet away. I did not cry. I did not run. Beside my sensible black flats, resting on a heavy black equipment crate, was the secondary backup microphone. I reached down. My hand did not shake. My fingers wrapped around the cold metal chassis of the microphone. I turned it on. The tiny green indicator light flared to life, a microscopic beacon in the dark. I stepped out of the shadows and directly into the harsh, blinding circle of the spotlight. The collective gasp that rippled through the grand ballroom was palpable. A sudden vacuum of air sucked in by 500 shocked billionaires, venture capitalists, and socialites. I began to walk. I did not rush. I took slow, deliberate, perfectly measured steps across the polished mahogany floorboards. The heavy, oppressive silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic, steady click of my shoes echoing off the acoustic paneling. With every single step I took, the smug, predatory triumph on Preston and his face began to fracture and dissolve. His smirk faltered. His eyes widened a fraction of an inch, darting nervously toward the wings as if looking for security to drag me away. He shifted his weight nervously from his left foot to his right. He had meticulously scripted a victim, expecting a total emotional collapse, but the person walking toward him was a highly calculated architect of his impending doom. I reached the exact center of the stage. I stopped exactly 2 feet in front of him, up close, without the benefit of the flattering distance. The nauseating smell of his expensive bourbon and sheer panic sweat was overwhelming. I looked directly into his bloodshot eyes. I did not glare. I did not scowl. I offered him a smile. It was a perfect, razor-sharp, terrifyingly calm smile that communicated absolute, unwavering control. I raised the backup microphone to my lips. My voice, amplified by the state-of-the-art acoustic system I had personally calibrated by hand just a few hours prior, resonated through the massive hall with absolute crystal-clear precision. "Thank you, Preston." The words hung heavily in the dead air. I paused for exactly 3 seconds, letting the utter absurdity of my polite, measured gratitude sink deep into the minds of the captive audience. Indeed, this machine is far too rotten for me to continue fixing. Preston blinked rapidly, his jaw going completely slack. The meticulously rehearsed bravado drained entirely from his posture. He leaned away from me slightly, his body language screaming that he finally realized my calm demeanor was a lethal, physical threat. I reached into the right pocket of my tailored blazer. My fingers brushed past the heavy cardstock of Marcus and his business card and found exactly what I was looking for. I pulled out a small, heavy, titanium encrypted USB drive. It contained the absolute core source code of the entire rural health mapping project, every single proprietary algorithm, the complex server architecture, the security protocols. It was all securely locked inside this tiny piece of metal. I reached out, slowly closing the physical distance between us. Preston flinched, a pathetic twitch of his shoulders, but he was far too paralyzed by the massive public spectacle to actually step back. I gently, almost affectionately, slipped the cold titanium drive right into the breast pocket of his bespoke midnight navy suit jacket. I leaned in incredibly close, moving the microphone just a fraction of an inch away from my mouth so the highly sensitive condenser would pick up every single syllable I was about to deliver. The decryption password for the entire system lies in your own technical competence, I whispered smoothly, my voice echoing like a quiet, devastating death knell through the silent ballroom. Good luck. I took a slow step back, breaking the intense physical proximity. I watched the horrifying realization hit him like a physical blow to the stomach. The color completely drained from his face. He knew, and I knew, that he did not possess the fundamental technical capability to write a single line of basic code, let alone decrypt a military-grade cryptographic lockdown. He was currently standing on a brilliantly lit stage holding a $5 million shell that he could not operate, could not fix, and could not sell. Before Preston could even form a single coherent syllable of protest, a sudden sharp movement in the exclusive VIP section instantly shattered the unbearable tension. Marcus stood up. He did not applaud. He did not look at Preston. He did not even look at me. The formidable chief executive officer of Vanguard Dynamics simply stood up, buttoned his tailored charcoal suit jacket with absolute, unhurried precision, and turned his head slightly toward his chief of staff, sitting rigidly beside him. In a room where you could hear a pin drop onto the carpet, Marcus did not need a microphone to command the space. His resonant, powerful baritone effortlessly carried across the velvet tables, slicing through the tension like a blade. "Cancel the $5 million check," Marcus ordered loudly, his voice completely devoid of any emotion, projecting pure, ruthless business calculus. "We do not invest in an empty shell." Those 12 words triggered an immediate, catastrophic chain reaction. The absolute stillness of the ballroom shattered into utter, uncontrollable chaos. Preston dropped his microphone. It hit the wooden stage floor with a deafening, high-pitched electronic shriek, causing half the front row of wealthy donors to physically recoil in their chairs and cover their ears in pain. "Wait, Marcus. Please, wait. It is just a minor technical misunderstanding," Preston stammered loudly, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, desperate whine that completely stripped him of his remaining dignity. He scrambled frantically to the edge of the stage, his polished leather shoes slipping awkwardly, almost tripping heavily over the thick black monitor cables taped to the floor. The immaculate visionary tech founder persona was entirely gone. In his place was a sweaty, panicking fraud, desperately begging for his professional life. The expensive concealer on his face began to run rapidly, streaking down his cheeks in a grotesque, muddy mess, as he desperately tried to wave down the retreating billionaire who was already walking toward the exit. At the back of the massive room, the press pool violently woke up. The initial paralyzing shock completely wore off, instantly replaced by the instinctual, bloodthirsty frenzy of tech journalists, realizing they were actively witnessing the greatest corporate implosion of the entire decade. Dozens of camera flashes erupted simultaneously, strobing like a violent, blinding thunderstorm. The rapid-fire clicking of camera shutters filled the air, capturing every single pathetic angle of Preston slipping on the stage. His face contorted in absolute, unadulterated terror. I did not stay to watch him beg. I simply turned my back on him. I walked over to the edge of the stage and descended the short flight of carpeted stairs directly into the crowd. I did not run. I maintained the exact same steady, deliberate, confident pace I had used to approach him. As I walked down the center main aisle, the sea of elite guests, venture capitalists, and powerful socialites physically parted for me. They moved back swiftly, hastily pulling their expensive silk gowns and tailored tuxedo jackets out of my path, staring at me with a complex mixture of absolute shock, deep horror, and an undeniable, quiet awe. Not a single person said a word to me. Not a single security guard stepped forward to try and stop my momentum. I walked straight through the glittering, chaotic labyrinth of tables, moving steadily right under the massive, sparkling crystal chandeliers. I reached the exit, pushed open the heavy brass-handled oak doors of the grand ballroom, and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air of the city. I left the deafening noise, the blinding flashing lights, and the absolute, smoldering ruin of a paper empire burning rapidly to the ground right behind me. The sun had barely broken over the city skyline the following morning when a courier violently pounded on the front door of my apartment. He shoved a thick, aggressively bound legal packet into my hands. It was a formal cease and desist order, drafted by a high-priced corporate law firm that charged more per hour than most people made in an entire month. The document demanded my absolute, indefinite silence and threatened catastrophic financial ruin if I dared to speak a single syllable to the press about what had transpired at the gala. My phone buzzed simultaneously on the kitchen counter. A sterile, automated notification popped up on the bright screen. My access to the Horizon Health Access Master Administrative Dashboard, the corporate email servers, the internal messaging channels, and all encrypted cloud storage partitions had been officially revoked. Preston thought he was brilliantly locking me out, cutting my vocal cords, and shutting me down. He was incredibly wrong. He had just pulled the pin on a massive digital grenade. I had spent 3 grueling years intimately anticipating his inevitable betrayal. I had quietly engineered a dead man switch, a perfectly hidden piece of executing code deeply embedded within the core administrative mainframe. The exact millisecond my superuser credentials were administratively terminated by a hostile system action, a dormant script violently woke up. It effortlessly bypassed all standard outgoing firewall filters and blasted a massive, heavily encrypted data dump directly to the personal, secure inboxes of every single member of the board of directors. It was not a petty, emotional manifesto. It was an immaculate, undeniable forensic accounting record. It contained the exact network timestamps, the heavily obfuscated hidden wallet addresses, and the specific blockchain transactional hashes, proving Preston had actively siphoned hundreds of thousands of dollars from the Emergency Disaster Relief Fund to aggressively day trade highly volatile, unregulated cryptocurrencies. I poured myself a fresh cup of hot coffee, sat at my kitchen island, and quietly watched the digital delivery confirmation receipts roll across my terminal monitor. The match had been struck, and the gasoline was already poured. Before the bewildered board members could even begin to process the massive financial fraud landing squarely in their laps, the internet went to absolute war. An anonymous junior audiovisual technician, the very same one Preston had verbally abused over the communication channels just hours prior to his downfall, had been quietly recording the entire master stage feed. By 9 o'clock in the morning, a pristine, high-definition, multi-camera angle video of my public firing hit every major social platform simultaneously. It was devastatingly clear. Every single drop of panic sweat, every desperate stutter, and every ounce of Preston and his pathetic collapse was immortalized in crisp, agonizing resolution. The brave technician had seeded the uploaded video with a single, highly optimized tag hashtag, corporate revenge. It bypassed viral status entirely. It went completely nuclear. It became a global cultural phenomenon within just 4 hours, dominating trending feeds worldwide. The financial fallout was brutal and completely instantaneous. Without the massive Vanguard Dynamics anchor investment to provide a thin, reassuring veil of legitimacy, the rest of the financial dominoes collapsed with terrifying, unchecked speed. Within 48 hours, the three remaining major philanthropic foundation partners formally issued scathing, aggressive press releases, loudly pulling their pledged capital and demanding immediate, third-party forensic audits of every single grant they had ever provided. The corporate operating bank accounts were instantly frozen solid by terrified compliance officers. Preston, trapped in a rapidly burning building entirely of his own making, made one final, fatal public relations error. He turned on his smartphone camera. He uploaded a pathetic, 6-minute-long video shot from the lavish, imported marble living room of his penthouse apartment. He deliberately abandoned his sharp bespoke suits for a humble, oversized gray cashmere sweater, desperately attempting to project soft vulnerability. He stared directly into the lens, his eyes red and glassy, and spun a wild, completely delusional narrative. He claimed he was the tragic victim of a deeply disturbed, disgruntled former employee who had viciously sabotaged the charity and was currently holding the critical life-saving patient infrastructure hostage for an exorbitant ransom. It took the global tech community exactly 22 minutes to completely dismantle him. Independent cybersecurity analysts, senior software engineers, and enraged ethical hackers dissected his apology video frame by agonizing frame. They ruthlessly mocked his absolute inability to bypass standard, basic encryption protocols. They flooded his comment section with highly technical, extremely humiliating questions regarding server architecture and database management that he could not even begin to comprehend, let alone answer. The public narrative did not flip in his favor. It backfired spectacularly, cementing his public reputation not just as a malicious fraud, but as a technically illiterate imposter who had been actively masquerading as an architectural genius. By Friday afternoon, the corporate bloodbath was entirely official. The board of directors convened an emergency, closed-door session that lasted less than 20 minutes. They did not politely ask for his resignation. They terminated him with absolute, extreme prejudice, publicly stripping him of his chief executive officer title, revoking his board seat, and forcefully seizing his founder equity. But losing his prestigious job was merely the opening prologue to his ultimate nightmare. The irrefutable financial data my dead man's switch had so helpfully provided was immediately forwarded to regulatory agencies. By the time the weekend finally arrived, stern-faced federal agents were actively serving multiple search warrants at the Horizon Health Access headquarters, boxing up hard drives, seizing paper records, and locking down corporate assets. Preston was no longer facing a simple, humiliating corporate embarrassment. He was staring straight down the barrel of multiple federal indictments for massive wire fraud and the gross, unforgivable misappropriation of philanthropic funds. Exactly 7 months later, the heavy oak doors of a federal bankruptcy court slammed shut on the final, pathetic chapter of Horizon Health Access. The company was officially liquidated, stripped down to the studs, and reduced to a massive pile of worthless legal paperwork and shattered investor promises. As for Preston, his meticulously crafted name became completely radioactive within the entire technology sector. No one would even mention him in casual conversation, let alone offer him a meeting. He was currently confined to his luxury apartment under strict federal house arrest, his passport confiscated, desperately fighting a losing battle against a staggering mountain of federal indictments that practically guaranteed a very long, very bleak stay in a maximum security penitentiary. The visionary was facing decades in a cage. Meanwhile, I was preparing for a fundamentally different kind of evening. I stood in front of a massive floor-to-ceiling mirror in a luxurious private suite overlooking the glittering city skyline, adjusting the sharp cuffs of my tailored emerald green silk blazer. Tonight was the official launch gala for Aegis Health Innovations, an aggressively capitalized new venture dedicated to building impenetrable, decentralized medical infrastructure for the most vulnerable populations on Earth. I was no longer the exhausted, invisible mechanic hiding in the dark audiovisual booth trying to hold a crumbling system together. I was the chief executive officer, Vanguard Dynamics had backed me with a massive, unprecedented initial funding round. Marcus had not just offered me a comfortable director chair, he had offered me an absolute war chest, and I took it without a second of hesitation. The grand atrium of the Contemporary Art Museum we rented for the launch was bathed in warm, sophisticated gold lighting. It was a stark, deliberate contrast to the cold, aggressively flashy aesthetic Preston had always demanded. The room was packed with the actual, quiet power players of the industry, the brilliant engineers, the strategic architects, and the silent venture capitalists who valued execution over theatrical charisma. As I walked through the elegant crowd, radiating absolute calm and undisputed control, I noticed a small group of highly uncomfortable men hovering nervously near a towering champagne display. It was the former board of directors from Horizon Health Access. They looked significantly older, their expensive suits hanging awkwardly on their diminished frames. The massive financial scandal had completely ruined their professional reputations, instantly turning them into industry pariahs. Seeing me approach, the former chairman stepped forward, a pathetic, hopeful smile trembling on his aging face. He practically bowed, offering a sickeningly sweet, groveling apology for how things had ended, aggressively rambling about how they were all blindly manipulated by Preston and his hype. He nervously cleared his throat, his eyes darting desperately around the opulent room, and formally begged for a lucrative consulting seat at the table of Aegis Health Innovations, aggressively claiming their extensive administrative experience could help guide my new venture to immediate profitability. I stopped. I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical, and profoundly satisfying detachment. I did not raise my voice, but I spoke with enough sharp, lethal authority to make the entire group physically flinch. I only build houses with solid bricks, I told them, my voice cutting through the ambient string quartet music like a titanium scalpel. I do not use people who specialize in gutting the foundation. Have a pleasant evening, gentlemen. I left them standing there in absolute, suffocating humiliation and made my way directly toward the main stage. The ambient house lights gently dimmed. A soft, warm spotlight found me, and I walked up the carpeted steps with unwavering, absolute confidence. I stood behind the sleek glass podium and looked out at the sea of eager, respectful faces. Marcus was sitting in the very first row, offering a singular, approving nod. I began my presentation. I did not use meaningless, empty buzzwords. I showed them pure, functional, flawless architecture. I demonstrated the revolutionary capabilities of our new secure routing protocol and the unshakable encryption standard we had pioneered. The audience was completely captivated, but I had saved the absolute best, most devastating strategic maneuver for last. Building a robust global network from scratch requires an immense amount of foundational data, I announced, clicking the sleek remote in my hand to bring up the final presentation slide. Many of you are likely wondering how Aegis Health managed to secure such a complex, comprehensive starting architecture in only 7 short months. I smiled. It was the exact same perfect, terrifyingly calm smile I had given Preston on his final night. Yesterday afternoon, a federal bankruptcy judge formally approved the total liquidation of all intellectual property, proprietary data, and core software architecture previously belonging to Horizon Health Access. Aegis Health Innovations successfully acquired that entire portfolio. I paused for exactly 3 seconds, letting the heavy, brilliant realization wash over the silent room. We purchased the entire system for exactly 2% of its original valuation. We bought the ashes of his failed empire with absolute pocket change, and tonight, we are using it as the bedrock for the future. The room erupted. It was not polite, measured, golf clap applause. It was a thunderous, overwhelming standing ovation from the most powerful people in the city. I stood under the bright, warm lights, soaking in the undeniable reality of my absolute victory. I had not just destroyed the man who tried to bury me. I had legally stolen his entire kingdom for pennies on the dollar and melted it down to forge my own crown. Thank you so much to all of our incredible listeners for joining me on this journey today. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. As a quick reminder, because YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, we will unfortunately not be uploading any new videos here for the foreseeable future. We are transitioning entirely to Patreon. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help us keep producing high-quality content, please consider supporting us over there. You will get exclusive access to the absolute best, fully detailed true revenge stories that we simply cannot publicize on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the description and the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your amazing support, and I will see you over on Patreon for the next incredible story.